The Second World War demanded an impossible feat of the United States.
In the span of a few short years, a peacetime army numbering barely 175,000 men had to be transformed into a global fighting force exceeding 12 million. These were not seasoned professionals. They were clerks, mechanics, students, and farmhands, pulled from the quiet rhythms of civilian life and shoved headlong into a grinding machine of preparation. The camps, stretching from the baking dust of Fort Benning to the endless cold of Wisconsin, became the crucible, where America's raw human material was hardened. The training was exhaustive, repetitive, and often seemingly pointless to the recruits performing the drills for the 1,000th time. They spent months slogging through mud, field stripping weapons in the dark, and marching until their feet bled, all under the relentless, barking instruction of veteran sergeants. This discipline, this commitment to standardized procedure and muscle memory, was often mistaken for bureaucratic excess. Yet, when these men finally stepped onto the world's most desolate and hostile battlegrounds, this rote preparation became the difference between disciplined operational success and catastrophic failure. We examine 5 pivotal moments in the conflict where the lessons learned on dusty stateside parade grounds paid off not in bravery alone, but in precision, procedure, and the cold professional execution of method under the most intense pressures imaginable. Our journey begins far out in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Central Pacific in the early summer of 1942, during the pivotal Battle of Midway. The stakes were absolute. The U.S. fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, faced 4 massive Japanese carriers, the very backbone of their imperial navy. Success hinged not on a superiority of numbers, for they possessed none, but on the exact timing and coordination of a few desperate air attacks. The weapon of choice for the decisive blow would be the SBD Dauntless dive bomber. The pilots of the Dauntless squadrons had practiced their attack profile thousands of times. Back home, over the shimmering, barren ocean off the coasts of California and Hawaii, they had mastered the terrifying physics of the vertical plunge. They had been drilled relentlessly on the precise 70-degree angle of the dive, the speed necessary to maintain stability, and the critical altitude for bomb release. These exercises were mind-numbingly repetitive, often criticized by the young aviators as dull and unnecessary on clear days. But the training was designed to override instinct, to force the pilot to ignore the sensory overload and adhere mechanically to the established procedure. On the morning of June 4th, as Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McCluskey's planes finally located the Japanese carriers, the sky was already churning with the violence of battle. Below them, the Kaga and the Akagi, magnificent steel fortresses bristling with weaponry, cut wakes through the deep blue water. As the American planes banked for their final approach, the air around them became thick with the dark black puffs of heavy anti-aircraft flak. A continuous, jarring percussion that felt like being trapped inside a steel drum hammered by giants. The sensory details of that descent were designed by chaos to induce panic. The immense noise of the slipstream roaring past the open canopy, the terrifying visual of tracer rounds zipping by like angry, luminous hornets, and the violent vibration as shrapnel chewed holes in the fuselage. Yet the training took over. The pilot's eyes locked onto the illuminated target reticle, ignoring the smoke filling the cockpit and the scream of the wind. They had been taught to use a specific reference point on the horizon, hold the stick steady, and trim the aircraft just so. The success of the attack was not merely due to the courage of the individual pilots, but to the seamless operational coordination drilled into the squadron leadership. They arrived in waves, perfectly synchronized, plunging vertically, one after the other. This mechanical timing, the precise interval between planes, meant the Japanese carrier defense crews could not reset their aim or recover their nerves. The intensity of the training allowed the pilots to execute a vertical drop through a hurricane of fire, achieving a high-speed, high-G maneuver. With the same detached professionalism they might use to file a flight plan. The bomb release was instantaneous, timed to the exact heartbeat they had practiced. The release lever was pulled, not in a desperate spasm of fear, but with the cold, deliberate pressure of a well-oiled machine. The result was devastation. 4 bombs striking the Akagi in rapid succession, followed closely by the hits on Kaga and Soryu. It was the training that ensured the bombs hit the target, not the water. The rigorous adherence to the 70-degree plummet angle, practiced over and over until it was etched into the nervous system, transformed a desperate gamble into one of the most decisive victories in naval history. Our focus shifts now from the searing heights of the Pacific sky to the blood-soaked, churning surf of the European mainland, Omaha Beach on D-Day, June 6, 1944. The American infantry facing this segment of the invasion line met a degree of prepared resistance that was unmatched across the entire invasion front. For the GIs waiting ashore, the environment was a sensory nightmare. The freezing gray water, the constant metallic ripping sound of the NG-42 machine guns tearing through the air, and the sheer visual horror of men collapsing into the waves beside them. Amidst this maelstrom, a very specific group of soldiers had the most crucial and arguably the most exposed job: the combat engineers. These men were not primarily tasked with engaging the enemy. Their mission was operational clearance. They had to destroy the layered defensive obstacles, steel hedgehogs, mined wooden ramps, and Belgian gates that lay submerged in the tidal zone, clearing lanes for the subsequent waves of landing craft. This task required precision, stillness, and an absolute adherence to procedure in a place where stillness meant death and procedure felt impossible. The training for the engineer units had been extensive, often held in the dark and cold of British coastal areas, practicing the placement of composition C2 high explosives on geometrically complex obstacles. Every engineer learned the same sequence: how many blocks of TNT were needed for a specific depth of water, the exact placement for maximum concussive effect, and most crucially, the precise length of time delay fuse needed to allow them to escape the immediate blast radius. This was demolition science reduced to mechanical rote. As they reached the shallows of Omaha, the engineers faced relentless German fire that shredded their ranks. Men dropped their satchels and charges, many sinking into the water, never to rise. Yet survivors who pushed forward recount performing their duties with a chilling detachment. The mind was screaming panic, but the hands, trained repeatedly in the safety of Devon coastlines, knew exactly what to do. Imagine an engineer, shoulders hunched against the spray and shrapnel, knees deep in the viscous churn of the tide. He ignores the chatter of bullets passing inches over his head. His focus is on the cold, greasy texture of the explosive charge he handles. His gloved fingers, stiffened by the salty cold, automatically check the crimp on the detonator cap. He then counts out the exact length of the slow-burning fuse, a measure memorized from a manual. His body moves through the trained motions, secure the charge with duct tape or wire onto the designated structural point of the steel hedgehog, ensure the connection is tight against the wet metal, ignite the fuse with a safety match protected inside a small tin, and then run, not recklessly, but according to the carefully calculated withdrawal distance. This adherence to the mechanical method, learned in weeks of grueling, often boring exercises, preserved the operational capability of the unit.
Even as its physical structure disintegrated under fire, it was the trained procedure, the how of the explosion, that superseded the instinct.
To drop everything and find cover. The engineers who survived were able to complete their critical mission.
Because their training had reduced a lethal, complicated task into an automatic, reproducible series of physical movements. Their success was a testament not merely to bravery, but to the triumph of standardized technique over situational horror, ultimately creating the narrow, precarious paths through which the main force could eventually push inland. Following the devastating efficiency of coordinated assaults, we move south to the utterly different, suffocating context of the Pacific Jungle War. The grueling, oppressive green humidity of Guadalcanal in 1942 and 1943. Here, the challenge was not flak or fixed defenses,
But invisibility, disease, and the pervasive terror of the enemy existing just yards away, unseen, unheard, waiting for the cover of night.
the Marine Corps, anticipating the unique environmental and tactical challenges posed by the dense jungles of the Solomons, had established specialized training regimens, notably in the Panama Canal Zone. These drills were harsh and focused on counterinsurgency and deep penetration tactics.
The primary lesson was survival in an environment that actively tried to dismantle the human body and mind.
The Corps training involved movement protocols, highly specialized patrol formations that maintained precise spacing, ensuring that if one man drew fire, the rest of the unit was not simultaneously annihilated while still maintaining the ability to lay down immediate covering fire. More critical still was the development of a silent language, a system of hand signals and body language designed to replace shouting in an environment where noise traveled eerily far and fast, guaranteeing immediate enemy contact. On Guadalcanal, the Marines were living in a constant state of saturated discomfort. The air was thick, heavy, and wet, smelling perpetually of rotting leaves, mildewed canvas, and heavy sweat. Visibility was reduced to a few feet, and the constant hum of jungle insects created an auditory fog. Japanese forces, masters of stealth and night infiltration, utilized this environment perfectly, launching fierce, terrifying banzai charges and probing attacks in the dead of night. Consider a Marine patrol moving along a narrow jungle trail near the Lunga River. The lead scout relies entirely on the training that emphasized quiet foot placement, the heel-to-toe roll, testing the ground before committing weight. Every movement is a careful calculus against the environment. The men move in a staggered file, spacing determined not by comfort, but by the learned rulebook of the Panama drills. As the patrol rounds a bend, the lead man freezes, lifting a closed fist, the signal for halt, danger ahead. The rest of the patrol reacts instantly and silently, dropping into a low crouch, weapons raised. Eyes desperately trying to penetrate the wall of wet green. There is no verbal communication. The lieutenant sees the clenched fist, then the slow, deliberate pointing signal. 2 fingers extended, indicating enemy to the front, 2 individuals. If contact is made, the trained response is not to scatter, but to instantly form a defensive perimeter, a 3-dimensional deployment dictated by the specialized training. The men know, without a command, which direction to pivot, which sector to cover, and how to use the limited visibility to their advantage. This is where the silent signaling becomes life-saving. A sudden shift in the firing angle might be communicated by a subtle shift of the helmet or a flick of the rifle barrel, all understood immediately by the man covering his flank. During the intense night fighting, especially during actions like the assault on Edson's Ridge, the discipline instilled in the jungle drills was the sole tether to sanity. When the darkness erupted with screams and gunfire, the Marines relied on their trained position, staying put, maintaining spacing, and responding to the silent orders,
rather than succumbing to the natural impulse to retreat or huddle.
The Panama training had imprinted the correct, counterintuitive methods of jungle survival: silence over shouting, formation over individualism, and trust in the system of signals over the terror of the unseen enemy. It allowed small units to operate as cohesive, responsive organisms in the most fractured and isolating environment of the war. As the calendar turned to late 1944, the American Army faced a drastically different but equally challenging operational environment. The desolate, frosted landscape of the Ardennes forest during the Battle of the Bulge. Here, the enemy was not just the Waffen-SS, but the cruel, penetrating cold of a European winter. That brought all machinery to the brink of failure. Mechanized units, particularly the tank battalions equipped with the Sherman M4, found themselves fighting a desperate battle for mobility. In the context of rapid counterattacks and strategic defense, a tank that cannot move is merely an immobile pillbox. It is a magnet for enemy artillery. The extreme cold, often dipping well below freezing, crystallized hydraulic fluid, seized engine blocks, and rendered complex mechanisms dangerously fragile. The crucial element that kept many American armored spearheads and defensive lines operational was the rigorous maintenance discipline instilled during the stateside training programs, particularly those carried out at Fort Knox, the traditional home of the U.S. Armor Corps. These programs had stressed preventative maintenance checks and services, PMCS, as a non-negotiable routine. Tank crews were taught that the time spent inspecting and cleaning before the action was always less than the time spent repairing under fire. In the Ardennes, this principle was tested to the limit. The ground was slick with ice, hidden beneath treacherous, heavy snow. Diesel engines struggled to turn over, and the oil, thick and sluggish, barely circulated. Imagine a forward operating base, or a hastily established repair point, amidst the shattered, snow-caked pine trees. A Sherman has taken a hit that disabled a track or fouled its running gear, or perhaps the engine simply seized due to the intense cold. The crew must dismount, entering a world where merely touching bare metal results in instantaneous, burning pain. The air is frigid, filled with a constant, dull roar of distant counter-battery fire. This means the repair clock is running against the possibility of a direct hit. The maintenance training mandated the use of specific, high-viscosity lubricants and anti-freeze measures. That often felt like excessive fuss back in the comparative warmth of Kentucky. Now that fuss was life itself. The mechanics and crewmen, fingers numb inside heavy leather gloves, relied on the rote sequence of disassembly and repair. They remembered the specific points where grease was likely to freeze and the exact method for thawing a fuel line using a small, controlled torch, keeping the heat away from the vulnerable engine compartment. Replacing a broken track required immense physical exertion, made exponentially harder by the freezing, slick conditions. A crew member working to remove a massive frozen track pin could not rely on strength alone. They relied on the learned technique of using specific tools in a specific sequence, hammering in practiced rhythms to maximize force transfer. The discipline extended beyond the immediate repair. The Fort Knox Regiment demanded that every piece of equipment, from the main gun traverse mechanism to the radio receiver, be inspected and cleaned daily, regardless of combat tempo. This routine, performed even when exhaustion was crippling and the cold was unbearable, meant that when the tank was needed, it was ready. In the height of the Bulge, the ability of American armor to rapidly return to the fight, often performing impossible field repairs under sustained bombardment, directly contrasted with the German mechanical difficulties, many of which stalled permanently due to the severe weather. This success was not due to superior engineering, but to superior human discipline, the cold, hard application of preventative maintenance taught thousands of miles away,
transforming frozen steel into reliable, responsive firepower.
Finally, we turn our attention from the fighting lines to a place where the precision of training saved lives rather than took them.
The stifling, blood-stained canvas of the forward aid stations and battalion clearing facilities.
Combat medicine in World War II was characterized by unimaginable pressures, mass casualties arriving simultaneously, limited resources, and the constant awareness that the station itself could be shelled at any moment.
Overworked corpsmen and surgeons faced immediate life-or-death decisions that had to be made in seconds.
Stripping away emotion to focus purely on prognosis and resource allocation. This demanding environment was managed through the rigid, cold calculus of triage.
Triage is a concept that was rigorously taught in rear-area military hospitals and field exercises.
Triage is the methodical classification of the wounded based on the severity of their injury and their likelihood of survival. Classification is relative to the time and effort required to treat them. It is a system designed to maximize the number of lives saved, even if it means prioritizing the treatable over those with catastrophic, unsurvivable wounds. Imagine the interior of a clearing station, a dim, dusty tent smelling overwhelmingly of iodine, ether, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. The floor is often damp, slicked with dirt and fluids. The noise is a mix of hushed urgency and the low, involuntary moans of the suffering. Casualties, caked in mud, dust, and grime, are arriving on stretchers faster than the staff can process them. The corpsmen standing at the entrance, often fresh out of the training, must immediately assess and tag each soldier. This assessment is not based on empathy or sympathy. It is purely clinical, driven by the rote memory of hundreds of hypothetical training scenarios.
The 4 categories, minimal, delayed, immediate, and expectant, must be assigned with brutal speed.
A soldier with a severe arterial hemorrhage might be tagged immediate. A man with a deep but non-life-threatening abdominal wound might be tagged delayed.
Crucially, a soldier whose injuries are so catastrophic that they require exhaustive surgery with little chance of survival.
He is categorized as expectant.
This last designation is perhaps the most difficult act of medical discipline, yet it is essential to the system.
It dictates that limited resources, plasma, anesthetic, and a surgeon's precious time must be devoted to the soldiers who have the greatest chance of returning to function. The training emphasized the precision of every action.
Actions included the tight, rapid application of a tourniquet to stop bleeding, the immediate insertion of a plasma needle. Also, the swift cleanup and closure of a chest wound to prevent pneumothorax. These were actions that had to be performed perfectly under duress, eliminating the possibility of second-guessing or hesitation. The success of the American Medical Corps in maintaining surprisingly low mortality rates.
This happened even in massive engagements like the Hurtgen Forest or the protracted campaigns in the Pacific, a consequence of standardized clinical instruction.
Triage training transformed the chaotic incoming tide of wounded men into an organized, prioritized flow.
It ensured that the medical professionals, just like the bomber pilots or the combat engineers, did not allow the overwhelming atmosphere of death and suffering to dismantle their adherence to method.
They utilized a standardized, repetitive instruction to bring order to the ultimate chaos. This proved that cold, precise calculation was truly one of the most powerful weapons in the American arsenal.
The rapid transformation of the United States military into a disciplined, effective fighting force was an industrial miracle built not only of tanks and aircraft, but of muscle memory and standardized procedure. In the heat of battle, when the world dissolved into noise, smoke, and sheer instinctual terror, The men who survived and succeeded were often those whose bodies responded automatically to crisis, guided by thousands of hours spent on mundane drills.
The bomber pilot plunged vertically because his training dictated the precise angle. The engineer cleared the obstacle because his hands remembered the exact sequence of detonation. The Marines stayed in formation because his reflexes obeyed the silent signal.
The tank crew fixed the track because the maintenance checklist was ingrained deeper than the fear of the shelling.
And the medic saved the maximum number of lives because he adhered to the cold logic of triage. These 5 moments, spread across the globe and spanning years of conflict, reveal a unified truth. Standardized, repetitive instruction was the invisible foundation of American combat effectiveness. It transformed chaotic fighting into disciplined, effective action, proving that the victory on the global stage was first won in the dusty, arduous training camps of America.
The true genius of the mobilization effort was the realization that in the moments of maximum danger,
Procedure, learned by rote, offered the only path through the fire.